The truck died 3 miles past the last gas station, sputtering to silence on a road that had forgotten its purpose decades ago. Adrian Thorne sat behind the wheel, the hands still gripping tight, watching dust settle across the cracked windshield like the residue of decisions she couldn't take back. 43 years old, explosive ordnance disposal specialist, 12 years active duty, 3 years a widow, and now owner of 80 acres of Oregon forest she'd never seen purchased, with the last functional numbers in her bank account. The engine ticked as it cooled. She didn't move. In the passenger seat, Valor sat perfectly still, amber eyes fixed forward through the glass. 7 years old, Belgian Malinois, 70 pounds of disciplined muscle and tactical awareness, wrapped in a coat that ranged from fawn to deep mahogany black mask, sharp against his muzzle. His ears tracked sounds she couldn't hear, adjusting with mechanical precision to frequencies beyond human range. He wasn't a pet, had never been a pet. The tan tactical vest across his shoulders, worn but maintained, made that clear to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Addie reached for the door handle, stopped, started again. The motion felt heavier than it should. 3 years since the phone call. 3 years since the highway patrol officer's voice, careful and practiced, had explained that Nathaniel Thorne's truck had left Highway 26 at 70 miles per hour, rolled 4 times, and come to rest against a stand of Douglas fir that had been growing since before Oregon was a state. No skid marks, no brake engagement, no explanation that made sense. Her husband, the man who drove like every mile mattered, the geologist who measured risk in parts per million and never rounded up. Gone. The official report said fatigue, said inattention, said sometimes people just drift. Addie had read that report until the words stopped meaning anything. Then she'd folded it, placed it in a drawer, and spent 3 years working jobs that required her body to move and her mind to stay empty. Construction, security, seasonal forestry, anything that ended each day with useful exhaustion and no questions asked. But the nightmares didn't care about exhaustion. They came anyway. The sand, the heat, the sound of rotors overhead. The moment her team lead had looked at her for confirmation and she'd given it, and 30 seconds later, the world had reorganized itself around a mistake that couldn't be unmade. Someone had died. Someone else had lived but shouldn't have, not in the condition they'd been left in. And Adrian Thorne had learned that some decisions once made carved their way into you and stayed there, sharp and permanent. So when the land listing appeared, 80 acres of remote forest in Redstone County, Oregon price reduced for quick sale, no neighbors for miles, she'd wired the money before she could think of reasons not to. She needed quiet. She needed distance. She needed a place where the only thing that could go wrong was weather. Valor shifted slightly, a minute adjustment of weight that brought his shoulder against the doorframe. Still watching, still waiting. Addie opened the door. The air hit her first, clean, sharp with pine resin and the particular dampness of Pacific Northwest autumn. No dust, no diesel, no city sounds bleeding into each other until they became a single ambient pressure against your skull. Just wind, just trees, just the faint call of a bird she couldn't name. She stood slowly, boots finding gravel that crunched like small confessions. The road stretched behind her, empty and patient. Ahead, a weathered sign with an arrow, Black Pine Falls. 8 miles. Valor exited the truck with economic precision, landing without sound, body already scanning the perimeter. His nose worked the air and controlled pulses. His tail, low and still, gave nothing away. Addie reached for her pack, checked the map against reality, confirmed the coordinates tattooed into her memory. The land she'd bought sat 4 miles east of the main road, accessible only by a service track that might or might not still exist. She looked at Valor. He looked back. No wag, no excitement, just acknowledgement. "Let's go," she said. They walked. The road narrowed as it climbed to asphalt, giving way to packed dirt, then to something that was more suggestion than surface. Pines thickened on both sides, their trunks straight and dark bark textured like the skin of something ancient that had learned patience through centuries. Addie's boots found rhythm. Left, right, breathe. The pack settled against her shoulders with familiar pressure. 60 pounds, tent sleeping bag, water filtration, 3 days of food first aid kit organized by her own hands, and a Sig Sauer P226 she hadn't fired in 18 months but cleaned every Sunday like ritual. Valor ranged ahead, then circled back, maintaining perimeter discipline that had been drilled into him before she'd ever met him. Military working dog, transitioned out when his handler retired, passed through the adoption program into Addie's life 6 months after Nate died. She hadn't wanted a dog, hadn't wanted anything that required care or attention or the risk of attachment. But the program coordinator had been persistent. And one afternoon, she'd found herself in a yard with a dozen dogs, all noise and energy, and desperate need. And in the back corner, one Malinois sitting perfectly still, watching her with eyes that understood what it meant to wait for orders that might never come. She'd taken him home that day, named him Valor because it felt less complicated than truth. The forest swallowed distance. Miles became a meditation, 1 foot, then another. The sun filtered through needles and fractured columns, dust motes drifting through light, like evidence of time moving forward whether you were ready or not. Addie's mind began to quiet, not heal, not forget, but recede into the background of static she'd learned to live with. This was why she'd come, for this silence, for the space between thoughts where nothing was required of her except continued forward motion. Valor stopped. The change was instant. His body locked into alert posture, weight forward, ears snapped upright and rotated towards something she couldn't perceive. His tail dropped flat, his breathing shifted to controlled, measured draws. Addie froze mid-step. Training kicked in before thought. She scanned the tree line, saw nothing, listened, heard only wind, but Valor didn't react to nothing. She approached slowly, hand dropping to her hip where the sig rested. 20 feet, 15, 10. Valor held position, nose lifted, processing information through channels she'd never have access to. Then she saw it, a gap in the trees. Not natural, too regular, too deliberate. She pushed through the undergrowth, branches catching at her jacket, and emerged into a clearing that shouldn't exist. The tent sat crooked on uneven ground, one corner sagging where she'd driven the stake at the wrong angle. Gray canvas, military surplus designed for function over comfort. It looked exactly like what it was, shelter erected by someone who knew the mechanics, but had forgotten to care about the results. Addie stared at it, then at Valor. The dog sat 10 feet away, head tilted precisely 15 degrees to the right, amber eyes fixed on the tent with an expression that somehow conveyed judgment without a single sound. The silence stretched. "It works," Addie said finally. Valor lowered his gaze to the ground, drew one long breath through his nose, the canine equivalent of a disappointed sigh. Despite everything, despite the weight she carried, despite the 3 years of careful emotional containment, Addie felt something crack. Just slightly. Just enough. Her mouth twitched, almost smiled, caught itself. "You're not here to critique my camping skills," she muttered, dropping her pack. Valor stood turned in a precise circle and lay down facing away from the tent as if he couldn't bear to look at it any longer. The almost smile won. Addie worked through the evening in methodical silence. Water filtration, firing, food prep. Each task completed with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this in worse conditions as under active threat with less equipment and more at stake. Valor maintained his perimeter patrol, circling out in widening arcs, then returning to report nothing worth reporting. His movements were economical, purposeful, every step earning its place. As darkness settled, Addie sat by the fire with an MRE she didn't taste and a canteen of water that filled space more than need. Flames shifted through orange and gold, casting mobile shadows across the clearing. Valor lay 6 feet away, positioned between her and the forest approach, eyes half closed, but ears still tracking, still processing. This was it. This was what she'd paid for: quiet, distance, the absence of expectation. No one knew she was here. No one would look for her. No one would ask questions she didn't want to answer. She could stay here forever. Let the seasons turn. Let the world continue without her input. Let the past recede into something that happened to someone else a long time ago in a place she no longer had to visit. The fire popped. Sparks drifted upward, winking out against the vast indifference of space. Valor's ear rotated sharply left. His eyes opened fully. Body shifted to active alert. Addie went still. "What is it?" The dog stood, faced the darkness beyond the firelight. A low sound vibrated in his chest. Not a growl. Deeper. A warning. Addie reached for the flashlight, swept the beam across the trees. Nothing. Just trunks. Just shadows. Just the particular darkness of a forest that had never needed human permission to exist. But Valor didn't react to nothing. She killed the fire, grabbed the cig, moved to the tent entrance, listened, wind through branches, the distant call of an owl. Her own heartbeat elevated but controlled. Valor remained locked on target, whatever that target was. Minutes passed, 5, 10. Nothing emerged from the darkness. No sound, no movement, no threat that manifested into something she could address. Finally, Valor's tension eased. He turned, looked at Addie once, then lay down again. Subject closed. Addie holstered the weapon. A false alarm. The dog didn't respond. Dogs didn't do false alarms. They responded to real stimuli that humans couldn't detect, which meant something had been out there, something that chose not to approach, or something that was simply observing. Addie didn't sleep well that night, but then she rarely did. Morning arrived gray and cool mist threading through the pines like something with intention. Addie broke camp with efficient precision, packing everything into its designated place, leaving no trace that she'd been there except flattened grass that would recover in days. Valor waited alert and ready, tactical, vest-secured posture, professional. They walked deeper into the property. Addie had coordinates burned into memory from the survey map. 80 acres meant space, meant topography, meant she needed to understand the land she'd purchased before winter made exploration impossible. The terrain shifted as they climbed. Gentle slopes gave way to steeper grades. Pine gave way to mixed-growth oak and maple interspersed, their leaves already turning rust and gold. Creek beds cut through low points, mostly dry now, but clearly active in spring. It was beautiful, objectively, undeniably. The kind of landscape that appeared in photographs designed to sell the idea of escape to people who'd never actually tried it. Addie felt nothing. Beauty required a kind of openness she'd lost access to, but she could appreciate the utility. The water sources, the sight lines, the places where a person could build something small and defensible and forgotten. They reached a ridge overlooking a valley that stretched east toward mountains already white-capped with early snow. The view opened up vast and indifferent, the kind that made human concerns feel appropriately small. Addie checked the map, confirmed the boundaries. This was hers. All of this silence, all of this space. She should feel something. Relief, satisfaction, the beginning of something like peace. Instead, she felt tired. Valor moved ahead, picking his way down the slope toward a dense thicket of undergrowth and fallen timber. His gait shifted. Purpose entered his movement. He was tracking something. "Valor," Addie called. "Stay close." The dog stopped, looked back, then forward again. His ears were locked on target, body aligned with singular focus. He took 3 more steps. Stopped completely. Went rigid. Every muscle in his body froze. Tail dropped flat, ears forward. Weight shifted forward onto his front legs, the classic alert posture Addie had seen 100 times in training scenarios. But they weren't training, and there was no target. Valor, forward. The dog didn't move. His ears rotated back, flattened against his skull. The universal canine signal for refusal. Addie felt ice slide down her spine. In 18 months together, Valor had never refused a direct command. Not once. Valor. Nothing. The dog stood like he'd been cast in bronze, positioned between Addie and whatever lay ahead, his body language screaming one word: stop. Addie approached slowly, hand on her weapon, eyes scanning, looking for the threat that would justify this reaction. She saw nothing, just undergrowth, just fallen timber, just the accumulated debris of a forest doing what forests do. She reached Valor's position. The dog didn't acknowledge her arrival, didn't break focus. Addie followed his sight line. There, partially obscured by blackberry vines and volunteer saplings. Something that didn't belong. Metal, rusted, curved. She pushed forward, pulling branches aside, and the forest gave up its secret reluctantly. A rail car, old, diesel freight. Burlington Northern logo faded but still visible beneath decades of oxidation and neglect. 80 feet long, 15 feet high, sitting level on ground that had grown up around it, trees pressed against its flanks, like the forest was slowly reclaiming what had been abandoned. Addie stopped breathing. There were no tracks, no rails, no cleared path. The nearest active rail line was 6 miles west on the far side of Black Pine Falls. This thing weighed 40 tons empty. How did it get here? Who moved it and why? The questions lined up like ordnance, each one more unstable than the last. Valor hadn't moved. Still frozen, still refusing. Addie circled the car, slowly taking in details. The wheels were half buried in decades of leaf litter and soil. The undercarriage showed signs of being drag-scarred metal where something had gripped and pulled. The sliding door on the south side was closed but not locked, just rusted into position by time and weather. She found a fallen branch, used it as leverage. The door shrieked in protest, metal on metal, a sound that probably carried half a mile through the silent forest. It opened 18 inches. Enough. Addie pulled her flashlight, drew her weapon, entered tactical space the way she'd been trained, thousands of hours of muscle memory, taking over body, moving through the choreography of room clearing, even though this wasn't a room and there was no enemy. Except maybe there was. The beam cut through darkness thick as fabric. Dust motes swirled in the light, disturbed for the first time in years. The air inside was cool and dry, preserved somehow, like the car had been sealed against time itself. The interior had been converted. This wasn't cargo space. This was workspace. A wooden desk, handmade, anchored against the forward wall. A filing cabinet, metal olive drab military surplus. A corkboard, still mounted, papers pinned and faded. A camp chair folded in the corner. A Coleman lantern, empty of fuel, sitting on a shelf made from reclaimed lumber. Someone had worked here, lived here maybe, used this place for something that required isolation and secrecy. Addie approached the desk. The surface was scarred with used cup rings and pencil grooves and the particular wear pattern of someone who'd spent hours leaning over documents, thinking, planning. A map lay spread across the wood corners, weighed down with rocks. She recognized the topography immediately. Redstone County, her county. The survey lines were marked in faded pencil roads and waterways labeled in tight, precise handwriting. But someone had added notations. Red ink, circles and arrows, and areas marked with hash marks. And words. Words that made her stomach tighten. High risk, contaminated. Do not drill, evacuate. The annotations covered a swath of territory that included Black Pine Falls. All of it. Every street, every home. The school. The diner. The post office. 8 miles west. 1,200 people. Addie shifted the map carefully. Beneath it, another document. Official letterhead. Silverbrook Mining Operations. Dated 1985. She read, standing up, flashlight held, steady, weapon still drawn, because some part of her understood that information could be more dangerous than any physical threat. The document outlined a mining operation, uranium extraction, small scale, years of production, and then a section marked decommissioning plan. The language was bureaucratic, sanitized, but Addie had read enough military reports to recognize when words were being used to hide reality instead of reveal it. Tailings disposal, containment protocols, monitoring schedules. All of it stamped approved by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, date March 1991. Signature D. Hartwell, Regional Inspector. She turned to the filing cabinet, pulled the top drawer. It opened with a screech that set her teeth on edge. Files, dozens of them, organized with obsessive precision, each one labeled by date and subject. She pulled one at random. Water quality reports, testing data, chemical analysis, and results that made no sense until they made perfect sense. Radionuclides, rating 222. Uranium oxide, thorium, lead-210, all present in concentrations that far exceeded federal safety limits. All traced back to a single source point, the abandoned Silverbrook mine now buried under residential development. Black Pine Falls was built on a bomb, a slow bomb, the kind that took decades to kill you cell by cell, generation by generation. And someone had known, someone had documented it, someone had gathered this evidence and hidden it in a rail car in the middle of nowhere, 6 miles from the nearest road. Addie's hands were shaking. She forced them still. She returned to the desk, looked more carefully. There, half buried under the map, a notebook, spiral bound. The cover was worn, smooth corners curled from handling. She opened it. The handwriting hit her like a fist. Neat, precise, slightly compressed, like the writer was always trying to fit more information into less space. She knew this handwriting, had seen it on grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter when one of them left early for work. Nate, her vision tunneled. Sound became distant. She was reading but not processing, seeing words but not connecting them to meaning, because meaning required accepting something impossible. August 15th, 2021. I found it. After 2 years of searching, cross-referencing old reports, following paper trails that kept disappearing, I found it. The tailings from Silverbrook were never properly disposed of. The company went bankrupt in 1991, filed the minimum required paperwork, claimed they'd transferred all hazardous materials to a licensed facility in Nevada. They didn't. They buried them under 6 feet of soil, and sold the land to developers who built Black Pine Falls on top of radioactive waste that will remain dangerous for the next 80,000 years. Hartwell signed off on it. Desmond Hartwell, Regional Environmental Inspector. He approved the closure, approved the land transfer, signed documents declaring the site clean when he knew it wasn't. I have the proof, original documents, forged test results, bank records showing payments made to Hartwell's personal account. I'm taking this to the EPA, to the state, to whoever will listen. The people living there don't know they're drinking contaminated water. breathing contaminated air. Their children are playing in soil that's killing them slowly, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Followed. My office was broken into last week. Nothing taken but files removed. Someone knows what I'm looking for. If anything happens to me if I don't make it back from this last site visit, Addie, if you're reading this, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. Should have brought you in, but I wanted to protect you from this, from them. Don't let them silence this. Don't let them bury the truth again. The mine is real. The contamination is real. And Hartwell knows everything. If I don't come back, you'll know it wasn't an accident. The notebook slipped from Addie's fingers, hit the floor with a sound like punctuation. Outside, Valor barked once. Sharp, urgent. Addie's training kicked in. She moved to the door, weapon up, flashlight off, using the opening as a frame to scan the exterior. Nothing moved. The forest stood silent, watching, offering no answers. But Valor was never wrong. She exited the rail car, carefully sweeping angles, checking sightlines. The dog was positioned 20 feet away, facing east, body rigid with tension. Talk to me, Addie said quietly. Valor's ears rotated. He took 3 steps forward, stopped, dropped his nose to the ground. Footprints. Fresh. Boot treads pressed into soft earth near the base of the rail car, leading away toward the access road. Someone had been here. Recently. Maybe as recently as this morning. Someone knew about this place, knew what it contained, and had decided to check whether it had been discovered. Addie felt the weight of understanding settle over her like a tactical vest. Heavy. Necessary. Confining. Nate hadn't died in an accident. He'd been killed. Murdered by someone who couldn't afford for the truth to surface. And now she was standing in the same place he'd stood, holding the same evidence he'd gathered, probably being watched by the same people who'd decided his life was an acceptable cost. The question wasn't whether she was in danger. The question was how immediate that danger had become. Valor returned to her side, pressed against her leg. The contact was brief but deliberate. Solidarity, partnership. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Addie holstered her weapon, looked at the rail car one more time. All that evidence, all those documents, years of work, proof that could save 1,200 people. Or destroy them. Because if the truth came out, Black Pine Falls wouldn't just need cleanup. It would need evacuation. Permanent relocation. The complete dismantling of a community that had existed for 30 years, built on ground that should never have been developed. And the people living there, the families who'd built their lives in that valley, they'd lose everything. Their homes would be worthless. Their investments gone, their history erased. Telling the truth meant destroying the very people she'd be trying to save. Nate had understood that. She could see it in his writing. The hesitation, the moral weight pressing down on every word. But he'd made his choice, had decided that truth mattered more than comfort, that people deserved to know the risk they were living with, even if that knowledge came with a cost they couldn't afford, and it had killed him. Addie stood in the clearing, surrounded by forest that didn't care about human dilemmas, with a dog who'd learned to trust her judgment, holding a decision she wasn't ready to make. The sun was setting, shadows lengthened, temperature dropped. She needed to move, needed to decide, needed to act. But first she needed to understand what she was actually dealing with. Who knew about this place? Who'd killed Nate? Who was still protecting the secret that had cost her husband his life? She took photos, dozens of them, the rail car, the interior, the documents, the map, the notebook. Every piece of evidence preserved digitally, backed up to cloud storage through her phone's spotty connection. Then she closed the door, pulled branches back over the opening, made it look undisturbed from a distance. Valor waited patiently, understanding, without words, that the mission had shifted. They weren't exploring anymore. They were investigating. They were hunting. Addie checked her watch. 4 hours of daylight left. 8 miles to Black Pine Falls. She needed supplies, needed information, needed to understand the town that sat unknowing on contaminated ground. Let's go, she said. They walked back toward the road, and with every step, Addie felt the past 3 years of careful disconnection beginning to crack. She'd come here to hide, to forget, to let the world continue without her. But the world had followed her, had been waiting here all along. And now she had a choice that was really no choice at all. Walk away, stay silent, let the secret stay buried, or pick up the mission Nate had died trying to complete, knowing it would probably kill her too. Valor walked beside her, steady and sure, and Addie realized she'd already decided. Had decided the moment she recognized Nate's handwriting. Maybe even before that. Maybe the moment she'd wired money for 80 acres of forest without knowing what she'd really bought. The universe had a sense of humor. Dark, unforgiving, but undeniable. She'd wanted distance. She'd wanted quiet. She'd wanted escape. Instead, she'd found a mission. And despite everything, despite the weight and the danger and the absolute certainty that this would end badly, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. The walk back felt shorter. The forest felt less oppressive. And when they reached the main road and the sun broke through clouds to illuminate the sign pointing toward Black Pine Falls, Addie allowed herself one moment of dark humor. "Here we go again," she said quietly. Valor glanced up at her. His amber eyes caught the light, and for just a moment she could have sworn he approved. The town of Black Pine Falls appeared gradually the way all small towns do when approached from back roads nobody maintains anymore. First, scattered mailboxes leaning at angles that suggested defeat, then driveways leading to houses set back from the road visible through gaps in trees that had been planted as saplings by people now decades gone. Finally, the town itself compressed into 4 blocks of buildings that pretended prosperity through fresh paint and window boxes full of flowers fighting against autumn. Population 1,200. Established 1992. Welcome. Addie drove slowly down Main Street in the truck she'd coaxed back to life with borrowed jumper cables and stubborn refusal to accept failure. Valor sat in the passenger seat, vest visible, posture alert. His presence changed how people looked at the vehicle. Not hostile, just cautious. The way you watch something that might be dangerous or might be protection and you're not sure what you're hoping for. She parked in front of a diner that looked like it had been designed in 1950 and saw no reason to update. Chrome trim, red vinyl booths visible through windows that needed washing. A sign that said Estelle's in cursive neon that probably hadn't worked in years. Valor exited when she did, moving to heel position without command. They entered together. Conversation didn't stop. That only happened in movies. But it shifted, dropped in volume, acquired a quality of awareness that hadn't been there before. Addie took a booth near the back. Valor positioned himself between her seat and the aisle, lying down but not relaxing, eyes tracking movement, ears processing sound. The waitress who approached was 70 if she was a day, built from wire and determination, hair steel gray, and pulled back so tight it probably hurt. Her name tag said Estelle. Her eyes said she'd seen everything worth seeing, and most of it twice. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." "Your dog work or play work?" Estelle nodded like this confirmed something. "You're the one bought the Mercer property." It wasn't a question. Small towns didn't ask questions they already knew answers to. "I am. 80 acres of nothing but trees and arguments. What are you planning to do with it?" "Live quiet." "Quiet's what we got most of." Estelle poured coffee with the efficiency of someone who'd performed this action 10,000 times and knew exactly how full to fill the cup without asking. "Also got nosy neighbors and opinions nobody asked for." "You looking for either of those?" "No, ma'am." "Good, I'll get you a menu." She returned with laminated paper and a hot dog on a plate. Set the plate on the floor next to Valor without ceremony. "On the house, for the working man." Valor lifted his head, sniffed the hot dog with 3 precise inhalations, gathering data, processing composition, reaching conclusion. He turned his head away, deliberately, completely. The rejection was total. Stell stared, then laughed, a sound like gravel being sorted. "Well, guess he's got standards." "He does." "Smart dog." She picked up the plate. "You want anything that meets those standards. Burger, fries, whatever he won't judge me for." "Can't help you there. That dog's judging everybody." It was true. Valor's gaze swept the diner with a detached assessment of someone conducting surveillance. His expression, if dogs could be said to have expressions, conveyed polite disappointment with humanity's life choices. Addie felt that crack again, the one that had started at the crooked tent. The smile threatened. She drank coffee to hide it. The door opened. A man entered, 65 and weathered, wearing a uniform that identified him as Forest Service before his face did. "Badge," said Kincaid. His boots were the kind that had walked 1,000 miles of difficult terrain and would walk 1,000 more without complaint. He scanned the diner, found Addie, approached with the careful directness of someone delivering news that might not be welcome. "Ms. Thorne." "Yes." "Wade Kincaid, District Ranger. Mind if I sit?" "Free country." He sat. Estelle appeared with coffee he hadn't ordered. He nodded thanks. "Heard you bought the old Mercer place," he said. "News travels. Always does." He wrapped both hands around the mug. Big hands, scarred. the kind built by decades of physical work in conditions that didn't care about your comfort. That land's up near Old Timber Road, remote country, good country mostly, but there's things you should know. I'm listening. That area's been subject to some discussion lately. Development talk, people with money and ideas about what the county needs. He paused, chose his next words carefully. There's folks who might approach you about selling. They'll be polite. They'll offer fair prices. They'll make it sound like you're doing everyone a favor. And that's for you to decide. I'm just saying be careful who you trust. And if you find anything unusual out there, anything that doesn't seem right, I'd appreciate a call before you talk to anyone else. He slid a card across the table. Government issue. Contact information printed in font that valued function over style. Anything unusual? Addie repeated. Like what? Wade's eyes held hers. They were gray steady, old enough to have seen problems that started small and grew teeth. Like the kind of thing a geologist might have been interested in before he died on Highway 26 3 years ago. The air in the diner grew heavier. Sound seemed to compress. You knew my husband. Knew of him. He came through here asking questions about old mining operations, about land surveys, about where certain things might have ended up after Silverbrook closed. Wade leaned back. Week later, he was dead. Accident, they said. Maybe it was. But I've been a ranger for 40 years, Ms. Thorne. I know when land starts acting wrong, and I know when people start disappearing for asking the right questions. Valor's head lifted, his attention fixed on Wade with new intensity. Not hostile, evaluating. What do you think happened? Addie asked. I think your husband found something someone didn't want found. I think he died for it. And I think if you're out there poking around the same territory, you should know what you're stepping into. Why are you telling me this? Because Nate Thorne was a good man trying to do good work. Because I'm tired of watching this county get sold piece by piece to people who don't live here and don't care what happens after they leave. And because I can see in your eyes you're not here to build a vacation cabin. He stood, dropped a 5 on the table for the coffee he'd barely touched. You need anything you call, day or night, that number works. He left without waiting for response. The door closed behind him with the soft sound of something important being set in motion. Estelle returned with food, set it down, looked at Addie with eyes that had been young when the town was built. Wade's good people, she said. Whatever he told you, he meant it. He suggested I might find trouble. Oh, honey, you already found it. Wade's just suggesting you be smart about what you do next. The burger was better than it had any right to be. Addie ate mechanically, mind elsewhere, processing the conversation. Wade knew, maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to connect Nate's death to the land, to the questions, to the thing that was still buried in forest 6 miles from where she sat. She was being warned, being offered an ally, being told that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it completely alone. The question was whether that made things better or worse. Valor accepted a French fry from her plate, ate it with dignified restraint, his way of saying the food met minimum standards. You're a gracious guest, Addie muttered. His eyes suggested he was being generous by accepting anything from an establishment that served rejected hot dogs. She paid, left a tip that would be remembered, walked back to the truck with Valor at heel. The town watched them go. Not obviously, but she felt it, the weight of attention, the curiosity mixed with caution. New person in a small town. New person asking old questions. New person who might be about to disturb the careful equilibrium of a place that survived by not looking too hard at its own foundations. She drove east, back toward her land, back toward the railcar. But first she needed to understand what she was really dealing with. Needed confirmation that the documents were real, that the threat was real, that Nate's conclusions weren't the paranoid delusions of a man who'd seen patterns where none existed. She needed Dr. Lillian Mercer. The address had been in Nate's notebook, penciled in the margin, hidden among other notes, like he'd known someone might need to find her, but didn't want to make it obvious. The cabin sat 5 miles past Addie's property, accessible only by a fire road that looked like it wanted to return to forest. The structure was small, dark-timbered windows that reflected afternoon light without revealing what lay behind them. Smoke rose from a chimney. Someone home. Addie parked, approached on foot. Valor ranged ahead, checking perimeter reporting. Back one occupant, no threat detected, proceed with caution. She knocked. Silence. Then movement inside. A shadow crossing behind curtains. The door opened 6 inches. A woman's face appeared in the gap. 62, maybe 65. Gray hair, short and practical. eyes sharp behind frameless glasses. The kind of face that had spent years looking at data and learning not to trust easy answers. Dr. Mercer. Who's asking? Adrienne Thorne, Nate Thorne's widow. The door opened fully. Lillian Mercer stood in worn jeans and a flannel shirt that had been washed until the color surrendered. Her hands were empty, but positioned in a way that suggested she knew where the nearest weapon was and could reach it quickly. "You look like him," Lillian said. "Same eyes, same way of standing, like you're expecting bad news." "I found his notebook in a rail car on my property. He mentioned you." Something crossed Lillian's face. Not surprise. More like confirmation of something she'd been expecting for 3 years. "You better come in." The interior was exactly what Addie expected. Books everywhere, stacked on tables, shelves floor, maps pinned to walls. A laptop old enough to remember when the internet was optional, and in the corner covered with a tarp shapes that suggested scientific equipment worth more than the cabin that housed it. Lillian gestured to a chair. Addie sat. Valor took position by the door. "Nate came to me 4 years ago," Lillian said without preamble. "He'd found discrepancies in closure reports for Silverbrook Mine. Things that didn't add up. Timelines that didn't match. Numbers that had been changed after initial filing." She pulled a file from a stack that looked ready to collapse. Opened it. Pages and pages of documents, photocopies, highlighted sections, handwritten notes in margins. "I worked for the USGS for 30 years, specialized in contamination assessment. When I saw what Nate had found, I knew it was real, knew it was bad, and knew that trying to expose it would be dangerous." Sorry, because Silverbrook wasn't just a failed mine, it was a cleanup disaster that got buried deliberately. The company went bankrupt, owing millions in environmental remediation. Rather than pay, they falsified closure documents, bribed inspectors, and sold the contaminated land to developers who built homes for people who had no idea what they were living on. She spread papers across the table. Test results, chemical analyses, radiation readings. "This is what the official closure report said." She tapped one column. "Safe levels, no remediation required. Land suitable for unrestricted use." "And this," she tapped another column, "is what Nate and I actually measured. Rating levels 40 times the EPA action limit, uranium decay products in groundwater, thorium in soil samples. The entire valley is contaminated, has been for 30 years, and 1,200 people have been living on top of it." Addie stared at the numbers. They were clear, damning, undeniable. "How many people know, besides us, whoever signed off on the fake reports, whoever paid for the cover-up, and whoever killed Nate to keep it quiet?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "You're certain he was killed?" "His truck went off the road at the one spot on Highway 26 where there's no guardrail and a 300-foot drop. No skid marks, no brake engagement. But his brake lines had been recently serviced. I checked. And the toxicology report showed trace amounts of sedative in his system. Not enough to flag officially, just enough to slow reaction time." Lillian's hands shook slightly as she closed the file. "They made it look like an accident, like he fell asleep driving, but Nate didn't fall asleep. Nate was murdered because he was about to expose something that would destroy property values, tank the local economy, and open up liability claims worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Who benefits? Anyone who owns land in Black Pine Falls, anyone who sold that land, anyone who approved the development, anyone who's been collecting taxes on property that should have been condemned. That's a lot of people with motive." "Yes, but only one person signed the closure documents." Lillian pulled another paper. Official letterhead, State of Oregon, Department of Environmental Quality. A signature at the bottom. D. Hartwell. Desmond Hartwell. He was the regional inspector in 1991. Signed off on Silverbrook's closure. Approved the land transfer. Declared everything safe. Where is he now? Still here, retired from state service. Works as a private consultant now. Development advisory. Helps companies navigate environmental regulations. Lives in a very nice house on property he purchased for far less than it's worth. The implication was clear. And you think he's still protecting the secret? I think he's invested in it. Financially, personally, legally. If the truth comes out, he doesn't just lose his reputation. He faces criminal charges, fraud, negligent homicide, possibly hundreds of counts if they can link the contamination to cancer clusters. Lillian stood, walked to the window, looked out at forest that had witnessed everything and remembered nothing. "After Nate died, I got a visit. Man in a nice suit. Very polite, very professional. He suggested that continuing Nate's work would be inadvisable. Suggested that sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. Suggested that I might want to consider early retirement in a nice quiet cabin where I could enjoy nature and not worry about complex problems that hurt good people. You're saying you were threatened. I'm saying I was given a choice, and I chose to live because I'm a coward, because I didn't want to end up like Nate. And because I told myself that one person can't fight an entire system built on lies that benefit everyone. She turned back to Addie. Tears tracked down her face, but her voice stayed steady. I've regretted that choice every day since. So if you're here to pick up where Nate left off to finish what he started, then I'll help you. I'll give you everything I have. Every test result, every document, every piece of evidence we gathered. Why now? Because you're his wife. Because you have a right to know the truth. And because maybe, just maybe, you're crazy enough or angry enough or stubborn enough to actually do something with it. Addie looked at the files, at the evidence, at 3 years of work compressed into paper and data, at the answer to every question she'd been asking since the phone call that destroyed her life. If I expose this, she said slowly, what happens to Black Pine Falls and federal intervention? Mandatory evacuation, property condemnation. The town ceases to exist. And the people displaced, compensated eventually, maybe if they can prove damages. But their lives are over as they know them. Their community is gone, their history erased. So telling the truth destroys them, and not telling it kills them slowly. Cancer, birth defects, shortened lifespans, all preventable if they just knew what they were living on. The choice Nate had faced, the same impossible equation, truth or mercy, justice or compassion. Save people by destroying everything they've built. Addie stood. I need to think. Think fast, because whoever killed Nate knows you're here, knows you found the rail car, and they're already deciding whether you're a problem that needs solving. Valor rose with her. They walked to the truck in silence that felt like the space between heartbeats before you pull a trigger. The drive back felt longer. The forest felt heavier. And the question followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. What would Nate want her to do? But she knew the answer. It was written in his notebook, in his careful documentation, in the way he'd gathered evidence, knowing it might kill him. He'd want the truth told, whatever the cost. The question was whether Addie had the courage to pay it. She was still wrestling with that question when the radio crackled to life. Emergency frequency. Forest Service. All units be advised. Missing child. 9-year-old male Caleb Reese last seen 1400 hours near Old Timber Road. Area search initiated. All available personnel respond. Old Timber Road, where her property started, where the rail car sat, where the contamination was worst. Addie looked at Valor. The dog was already alert, ears forward, body tense. It's not our problem, she said. Valor stood, walked to the passenger door, scratched once. We don't do this anymore. We're civilians now. The dog turned his head. Imeo looked at her with amber eyes that contained no judgment and no forgiveness, just patient certainty that some things weren't optional. Damn it, she turned the truck around. The search staging area was chaos, organized by people who'd done this before but never got used to it. Vehicles parked haphazardly, maps spread on truck hoods, volunteers in orange vests receiving sector assignments, and underneath it all, the particular fear that comes when a child is missing and daylight is running out. Wade Kincaid stood at the center, radio in hand, coordinating movements with the efficiency of someone who knew every inch of this forest. He saw Addie. Relief crossed his face. Your K9 was is good enough. We've got 12 sectors. Kid was hiking with his father, got ahead on the trail, disappeared somewhere near the old quarry access. That's contaminated ground. Wade's expression darkened. I know. If he's there too long, I know. That's why we need to find him fast. Valor was already working, nose down, circling, gathering scent information from the air and ground and everything in between. They were given the northeast sector, difficult terrain, dense undergrowth, steep ravines, the kind of area a 9-year-old could get into but not out of. Addie and Valor moved into the forest as a unit. She carried the radio, a first aid kit, and a rescue harness that had lived in her truck since she'd separated from service. He carried years of training that had been refined into instinct so pure it looked like magic. They worked in silence. Valor ranged ahead, sweeping wide arcs, checking scent pools, eliminating possibilities. Addie followed, reading his body language, understanding his communication without words. 20 minutes in, he stopped. Alert posture, head up, nose testing air. He had something. He moved faster now, purposeful, following a scent trail that existed only in his senses. Addie kept pace, pushing through brush, climbing over deadfall, trusting him completely. They reached a ravine, narrow, deep, rocky bottom 30 feet down. Valor positioned himself at the edge, looked down, looked at Addie. She approached carefully, looked. A boy, small, scared, perched on a rock outcropping 10 feet down, not injured visibly, but trapped. The walls were too steep, the rock too loose. Any attempt to climb would send him falling. Caleb! The boy's head snapped up. I'm here. Stay still, I'm coming down. She rigged the rope quickly, muscle memory from 1,000 training exercises, secured it to a tree that had probably been growing since before contamination was a word anyone knew. Rappelled down with controlled drops boots finding purchase on stone that crumbled under pressure. She reached him, checked him over. No injuries. Just fear and cold, and the particular exhaustion that comes from being lost. You okay? I got stuck. I couldn't get back up. I know. That's why we're here. She fitted him with the harness, clipped him to her line, called up to Valor, who watched from above with the patience of something that had never doubted the outcome. They climbed together, slow, careful, each movement tested before committed to. The boy was light but scared, which made him unpredictable. They reached the top. Solid ground. Safety. Caleb looked at Valor. Is that your dog? He's my partner. He found me. He did. He's good at his job. Wade arrived 10 minutes later with the boy's father, who collapsed to his knees and pulled his son close with the kind of grip that said he was never letting go again. Thank you, he said, voice breaking. Thank you. Addie nodded, said nothing, let the moment belong to them. Wade pulled her aside. That sector. The contamination readings there are highest. If the boy had been there another few hours. I know. This thing you're sitting on, this secret, it's not abstract anymore. It's kids wandering into poison and not knowing it. I know. So what are you going to do? The question everyone was asking. The question she'd been avoiding. I don't know yet. But that was a lie, she knew. Had known since she opened Nate's notebook. Maybe even before that. She was going to finish what he started. Was going to expose the truth. Was going to force the world to acknowledge what it had been ignoring for 30 years. Even if it destroyed the town. Even if it destroyed her. Even if it meant becoming the villain in 1,200 people's story because she refused to let them keep living a lie. The drive back to her property felt different. The weight was still there, but it had shifted. From burden to purpose. From fear to something that looked like resolve. She pulled up to her tent, killed the engine, sat in darkness listening to the forest settle around her. Valor waited, patient, loyal, ready for whatever came next. We're staying, she said quietly. The dog's tail moved once, brief acknowledgement. Then he exited the truck and took up position near the tent, watching the darkness for threats that might or might not come. Addie sat a while longer, thinking about Nate, about the choice he'd made, about the legacy he'd left her. Not money, not property, but a mission she couldn't ignore. She thought about the rail car, about the evidence still hidden there, about Desmond Hartwell, who'd signed documents that sentenced 1,200 people to slow death by ignorance. And she thought about the boy she'd just pulled from a ravine, about all the other children playing in contaminated soil, about the cancers that would come, the diseases that could be prevented if someone just had the courage to speak. Tomorrow she would make calls, would contact the EPA, would start the machinery that couldn't be stopped. Once set in motion, tonight she would remember why she'd become EOD in the first place. Not because she liked danger, but because she couldn't walk past a bomb and pretend it wasn't there. And Black Pine Falls was a bomb, had always been a bomb, was ticking toward detonation whether anyone acknowledged it or not. The only choice was whether to let it explode without warning or to evacuate first and accept the cost. She chose evacuation. She chose truth. She chose to finish what Nate started, whatever it cost her. Inside the tent, she pulled out her laptop, composed an email to the EPA regional office, attached photos of documents, summarized findings, requested immediate investigation. Her finger hovered over send. This was it, the point of no return. Once this email went out, everything changed. Her life, the town, everything. She thought of Valor refusing to move when ordered to leave, thought of the lesson in that. Some things you don't walk away from, some missions you don't abandon, even when they're not yours anymore. even when completing them might destroy you. She pressed send. The email vanished into the night, into systems and bureaucracies and processes that would grind forward with inevitable momentum. It was done. Addie closed the laptop, lay down, stared at the tent ceiling that Valor had judged so harshly. She didn't sleep, but she didn't regret. Outside, the forest listened, and in the distance, barely audible, the sound of an engine. A vehicle moving slowly along the fire road, headlights off, coming closer. Valor's low growl confirmed what she already knew. They were no longer alone. The hunt had begun. The vehicle stopped a quarter-mile out. Engine cut. Silence rushed back in like water filling a void. Addie was already moving, tent abandoned, gear packed in 60 seconds. Valor at her side, low and controlled, every sense locked on the threat approaching through darkness. She knew this dance, had performed it in places where mistakes were measured in casualties. The difference was that in those places she'd had backup, had had authorization, had had the weight of military structure behind every decision. Here she had a bomb and a choice she'd already made. They moved through the forest using terrain for cover, putting distance between themselves and the tent, creating options. Addie's night vision adapted quickly. Moon was 3/4 enough light to navigate by once your eyes accepted the conditions. Valor moved like smoke. No sound, no wasted motion. Just professional competence honed by years of work in hostile environments. They reached high ground overlooking the camp. Addie dropped prone behind a fallen log. Valor settled beside her body, pressed to earth, invisible in shadow. They waited. Minutes passed. 5, 10, then movement. A figure approached the tent. Male, average height, moving with caution but not expertise. He carried a flashlight he wasn't using yet. Civilian probably, or someone trying to look like one. He circled the tent once. Called out, voice carrying through still air. "Ms. Thorne, it's Desmond Hartwell. I was hoping we could talk." Addie's jaw tightened. So it was him, the man who'd signed the documents, the man who'd buried the truth, the man who'd probably ordered Nate's death. And he'd come alone. Which meant either he was very confident or very stupid. "I know you found the rail car," Hartwell continued. "I know you've been talking to people, making inquiries, and I understand why. Your husband's death was tragic, but what you're planning will cause far more tragedy. 1,200 people, Ms. Thorne. 1,200 lives you're about to destroy." He waited. No response came. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you a choice. A reasonable choice. I have resources, money, connections. I can make your life very comfortable. Set you up somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, somewhere you can live with your grief without hurting innocent people." Ooh, still nothing. Hartwell's shoulders shifted, frustration entering his posture. "Or you can be stubborn, can try to be a hero, and you'll end up exactly like your husband. An accident, a tragedy, another person who didn't understand when to let things stay buried." There it was, the threat wrapped in reasonable language, the same speech Lillian had probably heard. The same logic that had kept this secret contained for 3 decades. Addie's finger touched the trigger guard of her weapon. Not on the trigger. Not yet. But close enough to matter. Hartwell waited another 30 seconds, then turned and walked back to his vehicle. Headlights came on. The SUV backed up, carefully turned around and drove away. But he hadn't left. Not really. He just repositioned. Changed tactics. Whatever came next would be less polite. Addie and Valor held position until the sound of his engine faded completely. Then they moved circling wide, approaching the tent from a different angle, checking for secondary threats. Nothing. He'd come alone. For now, they broke camp in darkness. Everything packed. Everything ready to move. The tent went into its bag, the sleeping gear compressed into tight rolls. Within 15 minutes, no trace remained that anyone had been there. Addie loaded the truck by Phil hands, knowing where everything went without thought. Valor jumped in. They drove without headlights until they reached the main road, using moonlight and memory to navigate. She didn't go back to town, went deeper instead, toward the rail car, toward the evidence that couldn't be allowed to disappear. The email she'd sent would take time. Federal bureaucracy moved slowly. Investigations required approvals and protocols and chains of command that valued procedure over urgency. But physical evidence could vanish overnight, could burn, could be disappeared by people who'd spent 30 years making inconvenient truths go away. She needed to secure it, document everything, create redundancy that even Hartwell's resources couldn't eliminate. The forest road was worse at night. Ruts became traps. Branches scraped metal with sounds like fingernails on steel. But the truck was old enough not to care about cosmetic damage, and Addie had driven worse routes under worse conditions. They reached the clearing where she'd found the rail car, parked with the truck facing out, engine running, ready for fast departure if needed. Valor exited first, swept the perimeter, reported back area clear. Addie grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight, the camera, and the portable scanner she'd bought in town that afternoon. If she was going to do this, she'd do it completely. The railcar door opened easier this time, like it had accepted its secrets were coming out. Inside, the air still held that preserved quality, that sense of time suspended. She worked methodically, photographed every document, every page, every notation. The scanner hummed, converting paper to digital, creating backups that would live in cloud storage beyond anyone's reach. The map came down from the wall, the files from the cabinet. Nate's notebook carefully protected in plastic before being packed. She worked for 2 hours. Valor remained outside, positioned between her and the approach routes, providing security she didn't take for granted. When she finished, the truck held boxes of evidence that represented years of investigation. Proof that would end careers and destroy a town and maybe possibly save lives that hadn't been lost yet. Addie sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, looking at the rail car one last time. Nate had worked there, had sat at that desk, had written those notes, had known what it would cost him and done it anyway. "I'm sorry it took me 3 years," she said quietly. Valor's tail moved once, understanding without words. She drove back toward town, but not to her property, to Lillian's cabin, to the one person who understood what was at stake and might know what to do next. Dawn was breaking when she arrived, pink light filtering through clouds that promised weather. The cabin looked the same, but smoke already rose from the chimney. Lillian was awake. Addie knocked. The door opened immediately, like Lillian had been waiting. "You sent it," Lillian said, not a question. "Yes." "Then they know, and they'll act fast. I have the physical evidence, all of it, documents, files, Nate's research, everything." Lillian's eyes widened. "You took it from the rail car. Couldn't leave it there to disappear." "Good, smart, but now you're carrying the one thing they absolutely need to destroy." She stepped aside. "Get in here. We need to plan." Inside, Lillian's laptop showed email exchanges with EPA, contacts with journalists, with environmental lawyers. She'd been busy. "I made calls," Lillian said, "used old connections. The EPA will send inspectors within 48 hours. But that's not fast enough. Hartwell will move before then." "What can he do?" "Anything, everything. He has money, has connections in local government, has 30 years of practice making problems disappear." As if summoned by the conversation, Lillian's police scanner crackled to life. Fire reported. Old Timber Road area. Multiple units responding. Addie and Lillian looked at each other. "The rail car," they said simultaneously. They drove toward the smoke. Valor in the back seat, alert and tense. By the time they reached the access point, emergency vehicles already blocked the road. Fire crews were deploying, Forest Service coordinating, and in the distance, flames. Orange and violent against the gray morning sky. Black smoke rose in a column that bent with wind, spreading east toward the valley where 1,200 people still slept unknowing. Wade Kincaid met them at the roadblock. His face was grim, streaked with ash. "Railcars burning. Someone said it deliberately. Accelerant pattern clear even from a distance." Through the trees, Addie could see the glow intensifying. Heard the roar of fire consuming metal and wood, and 30 years of secrets that were no longer there. Valor's body was tense beside her ears, forward tracking the sound of destruction. His hackles raised slightly. Not fear, anger at the wastefulness of it. Except the secrets weren't in that railcar anymore. They were in her truck, in cloud storage, in email chains that had already reached people Hartwell couldn't touch. He'd burned an empty shell, a monument to his own desperation. "How long before it reaches other structures?" Addie asked. "Fire lines holding. Containment crews are cutting brakes now. We'll have it controlled by noon." Wade's radio crackled with updates he acknowledged with brief responses. Then he looked at her, eyes older than they'd been yesterday. "But that's not what you're asking." "No. He knows you have everything. This was a message, not just destroying evidence, showing you what happens to things that get in his way." Wade gestured toward the smoke. "He's not done trying." Addie watched the column of smoke bend and twist in the wind. Thought about the boys she'd pulled from contaminated ground yesterday. Thought about 1,200 people who'd wake up tomorrow to news that would shatter their world to save their lives. Thought about Nate, who'd stood in this same forest, gathering evidence that would get him killed. Who'd done it anyway because some truths couldn't stay buried. "Neither am I," she said. Evidence destruction, Wade confirmed, though they both already knew. Fire investigator will document everything, but proving who ordered it, who said it, that's harder. I have everything, Addie said quietly. I cleared it out last night. Wade's expression shifted, relief mixed with deeper concern. Then you're the target now, you understand that? Yes. What's your plan? Survive long enough for the truth to matter. A secondary explosion shook the air. Something in the rail car giving way to heat, metal shrieking, glass shattering, the sound of history being erased or trying to be. Valor moved closer to Addie, not seeking comfort, offering it. Solidarity in the face of deliberate destruction. The fire burned for 6 hours, consumed the railcar completely, reduced what had been Nate's workspace, his sanctuary, his evidence locker to twisted metal and ash. Fire investigators would find the accelerant traces, would document arson, would add it to a list of charges that was growing longer by the hour. But the secrets themselves lived on. Packed in boxes, backed up to servers, embedded in email chains that couldn't be recalled. Hartwell had tried to erase history, had succeeded in destroying the physical location, but the information had already metastasized beyond his control. By noon, the EPA confirmed they were fast-tracking the investigation. By evening, a preliminary team was en route from Seattle. By the following morning, Black Pine Falls woke up to federal vehicles parked outside the town hall and inspectors in hazmat suits taking soil samples from schoolyards and parks in the playground where children had been playing on poisoned ground for 3 decades. The secret was out, but secrets that big don't just leak. They explode. The town meeting was called for 7 p.m. Mandatory attendance requested. The high school gymnasium filled beyond capacity. 1,200 people trying to understand why federal agents had spent the day collecting dirt from their yards like it was evidence of a crime, which it turned out it was. Addie sat in the back with Valor. Wade stood near the emergency exits in uniform, ready for whatever came next. Lillian positioned herself close to the federal officials who would deliver the news that would end the town. The EPA director for Region 10 stood at the podium, mid-50s. Gray suit that had seen better days. Expression carefully neutral in the way of people who delivered bad news professionally. He didn't waste time on preamble. Didn't soften the blow. Preliminary testing confirms significant radiological contamination throughout Black Pine Falls. Radon gas at levels 40 times EP action limits. Uranium decay products in groundwater. Thorium in soil samples. Lead 210 in concentrations that pose immediate health risks. All traced to improper disposal of mining waste from the Silverbrook mine operation, which ceased operations in 1991. The gymnasium erupted, voices overlapping, fear and anger and confusion bleeding together into noise that had no organization, no direction, just raw emotion seeking outlet. Parents clutched children. Elderly residents stared at hands that had worked this soil for decades. Young couples who'd bought their first homes here tried to process that those homes were now worthless. Contaminated, condemned. The director waited for quiet, didn't rush it, let the first wave of shock break against itself. When he could be heard again, he continued. Federal health guidelines require immediate action. We're implementing a 90-day evacuation plan. Temporary housing will be provided through FEMA. Property compensation will follow EPA Superfund protocols. Medical screening will be available for all current and former residents. What about our homes? A woman's voice shaking, mid-30s, pregnant. Addie could see her from across the room, hands pressed to her stomach like she could protect what was inside from truth. Contamination remediation will take years, possibly decades. Some structures may need to be demolished depending on contamination levels. We'll know more after comprehensive testing is complete. Who's responsible for this? A man stood, older, worked hands. Probably lived here since the town was founded. Who did this to us? The director's expression hardened slightly. The mask of neutrality cracking to show anger underneath. That's under federal investigation. But I can confirm that closure documents filed in 1991 contained fraudulent data. Environmental testing was falsified. Safety certifications were forged. Someone signed off on contaminated land being declared safe for residential development. That someone will face federal criminal charges. 1,200 pairs of eyes began searching the room, looking for the villain, looking for someone to blame, looking for a target for rage that had nowhere else to go. They found him. Desmond Hartwell sat 3 rows from the front, perfectly composed, perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, face betraying nothing. But everyone knew. The whispers had already spread. the retired environmental inspector, the man who'd signed the papers, the man who'd approved the development, the man who'd lived comfortably for 30 years while the town he'd poisoned slowly died around him. He stood, looked around the gymnasium at the 1,200 people whose lives he'd gambled with and lost. "I deeply regret any role I may have played in this situation," he said, voice steady, practiced, every word carefully chosen by lawyers who'd prepared him for this moment. "I relied on data provided by the mining company. If that data was falsified, I was deceived along with everyone else. I'm as much a victim as anyone in this room." "Liar," someone shouted, a man Addie recognized from the diner. Father of three, carpenter. Others joined. The anger found focus, found direction, found target. "You killed us. How much did they pay you?" "My daughter has cancer. She's 8 years old." Security moved in before it could escalate into violence. Two officers flanked Hartwell, guiding him toward the side exit with professional detachment that said they'd done this before, moved people through hostile crowds, protected the guilty from the consequences of their actions. But at the door, federal agents waited. Not local, not bought. FBI Environmental Crimes Unit badges, visible expressions, hard. They'd flown in from Seattle that afternoon with warrants that had been months in preparation, waiting only for evidence strong enough to make charges stick. That evidence now existed. Addie had provided it. The lead agent stepped forward. Tall woman, 40-something, eyes that had seen too many people try to lie their way out of accountability. "Desmond Hartwell, you're under arrest for violations of the Clean Water Act fraud in connection with environmental permits, conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, and negligent homicide. You have the right to remain silent." Hartwell's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough to see the fear beneath 30 years of practiced calm. His face went white. His hands, which had been steady, began to shake. "I want my lawyer." "You'll get one. You're going to need several." Well, they cuffed him. Read him his rights in voices that carried through the gymnasium, gone silent. Led him to a vehicle with federal plates, while 1,200 people watched through windows, seeing justice arrive too late to save them, but soon enough to feel like something. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. Logistics, timelines, resources. The mechanical process of dismantling a community that had existed for 30 years on poisoned ground. FEMA representatives explained housing assistance. EPA officials outlined the testing process. Health department coordinators scheduled screening appointments. Social workers distributed information about trauma counseling and financial assistance, and where to go when your entire life had just been declared uninhabitable. People cried, people raged, people sat in stunned silence trying to process the impossible. And through it all, Addie watched from the back, holding the weight of being the person who'd pulled the pin on the grenade that destroyed their world to save their lives. Some people looked at her, recognized her as the woman who'd bought the Mercer property, connected dots, understood who'd brought the federal agents and the testing and the truth that was killing their town. Some looked grateful, most looked betrayed. When it ended, when people filed out into the parking lot to face a future that had evaporated in 2 hours, Wade found her. "You did the right thing," he said. "Did I?" They would have died slowly. Cancer, birth defects, genetic damage passed to children not born yet. You're giving them a chance to live, even if they hate you for it. Will they? Some, maybe most. That's the cost of truth. It doesn't always feel like rescue when you're the one being saved. Lillian approached, looking older than she had that morning. "EP wants to talk to you tomorrow. Formal interview. You'll need to explain how you found the evidence, why you started investigating. They'll want to document everything. And Nate's death. State police are reopening the investigation. Hartwell's vehicle records show he was on Highway 26 the night of the accident. His phone pinged a cell tower 2 miles from where Nate went off the road. Combined with your evidence of what Nate was investigating," she paused. "It's not proof yet, but it's enough for reasonable suspicion. Enough to dig deeper. It wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was movement toward it. And sometimes movement was all you could ask for." Addie walked to her truck. Valor jumped in without prompting. They drove away from the gymnasium, from the town, from the epicenter of destruction she'd caused that would save lives she'd never meet. The guilt sat heavy. Would probably sit heavy forever. But underneath it, something else. The knowledge that Nate's work hadn't been wasted. That his death had meant something. That the 3 years she'd spent hiding had ended with her finishing what he'd started. She thought about earlier when she'd tried to leave, when she'd packed her gear and told Valor they were going, when he'd sat by the tent and refused to move. had looked at her with those amber eyes that contained no judgment, only patient certainty that some things weren't optional. Stay, finish this, don't run. She'd listened, had made the choice he'd known she needed to make. And now 1,200 people had futures that extended past early death from preventable disease. That had to count for something, had to be worth the cost. They drove to Mirror Lake, a place Nate had mentioned once in his notebook. A place he'd wanted to show her, but never got the chance. The water was dark and still reflecting clouds and mountains with perfect clarity. Evening was settling in. The storm that had been threatening all day finally arrived, but gently. Just rain, steady and cleansing. Addie parked, got out, walked to the shore with Valor at her side. The dog moved carefully, not limping, but cautious. His left shoulder was bandaged where debris had caught him during the chaos at the fire scene. Not from the rail car itself, which had already been burning when they arrived, but from a widowmaker branch that came down when wind shifted, nearly hitting Addie before Valor pushed her clear. Another debt she owed him, another reminder that loyalty sometimes wore fur and walked on four legs and never asked for anything except the chance to keep you alive. She knelt beside him, ran her hand along his flank, feeling the solid reality of him, the breathing, the warmth, the aliveness that 3 years ago she'd thought she'd never want to depend on again. Good work, she said quietly. Valor's tail moved, brief acknowledgement. Then he lowered himself to the ground, letting his guard drop for the first time in days, trusting her to watch while he rested. She sat beside him. Let the rain fall on both of them. Let the silence of the lake fill the spaces where words didn't reach. Somewhere behind them, Black Pine Falls was beginning the long process of dissolution. Families packing, moving trucks being reserved, lives being compressed into boxes and carried away from homes that had never been safe but had felt like it. She'd done that. She'd made that choice. And she'd have to live with it the same way she lived with every other choice that had cost someone something they couldn't afford to lose. But she'd also saved lives, had stopped cancers that hadn't formed yet, had given children futures that extended past early death from preventable disease. That had to count for something, had to be worth the cost. The sun dropped toward the horizon, light shifting through rain from gold to silver to the deep gray that promised night coming. The storm intensified slightly. Thunder rolled distant over mountains. The seasons would turn, the land would remain, and eventually, after years of remediation, maybe the valley would be safe again. Maybe a new town would grow. Maybe people would return. Or maybe it would stay empty, a monument to the cost of lies told for profit and accepted for convenience. Either way, the truth was out. The secret was dead, and Nathaniel Thorne's work was complete. Addie pulled out her phone, opened the photo she'd taken of Nate's notebook, found the last page. The one she'd read but not fully absorbed until now. His handwriting. Neat. Precise. The last thing he'd written before he died. Addie, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't tell you everything. Sorry I put this burden on you. But I know you. Know your strength. Know that you won't be able to walk away once you understand what's at stake. Don't blame yourself for whatever you have to do. The choice was mine to start this. But finishing it, that's yours. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Do the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I love you. Always have. Always will. Finish this for me. And then tears came. Finally, 3 years late. 3 years of grief she'd been holding back because feeling it meant accepting he was gone. She let them fall. Sat beside a lake Nate had never shown her, with a dog who'd become family without her permission, and cried for everything lost and everything saved and everything that came next. Valor shifted, pressed against her leg despite the rain soaking his bandaged shoulder. Solid. Present. Loyal in the way only dogs know how to be. We did it, she said through tears. We finished it. His tail moved, slow, deliberate. Acknowledgement that the mission was complete. The storm continued into evening. Rain fell hard and steady, washing the world clean, at least temporarily. Addie and Valor sat in the truck, watching water sheet across the windshield, listening to thunder roll through valleys that held secrets no more. Her phone buzzed. Text from Wade. EPA confirmed. Full Superfund site designation. Federal funding approved. Hartwell denied bail. Facing 47 counts. You did good. She didn't respond immediately. Let the words sit. Let them mean what they meant. Another text from Lillian. Nate would be proud. I'm proud. Thank you for having the courage we didn't. That one she responded to, single word together, because it hadn't been just her. had been Nate's investigation, Lillian's science, Wade's support, Valor's loyalty. Caleb Reese's rescue reminding her why truth mattered more than comfort. A chain of people and choices and moments that had built toward this conclusion. Truth didn't come from single heroes. It came from everyone who refused to look away when looking away was easier. The rain began to ease. Addie started the engine. Time to find somewhere dry. Somewhere to rest before tomorrow brought new questions and old consequences. She drove slowly, headlights cutting through mist with Valor solid and calm beside her. Despite his injury, despite his exhaustion, despite having every reason to finally quit. But he didn't quit. Wouldn't quit. That wasn't who he was. The road ahead was uncertain. The future was complicated. But for the first time in 3 years, Addie wasn't running from anything. She was moving towards something, what exactly she didn't know yet. But it felt like the beginning of an answer to questions she'd stopped asking. 2 weeks later, Addie stood in front of a small cabin. Not Lillian's, not temporary, hers. Purchased with money the EPA had provided as compensation for her role in exposing the contamination. Whistleblower payment, they called it. Blood money, it felt like. But she took it anyway because refusing wouldn't change what had been done. Small cabin, 1 bedroom, kitchen that actually worked. Well, water tested 6 ways and cleared. Land surveyed down to bedrock and certified clean. A place to stay, a place to build something that wasn't about running or hiding or pretending the past didn't exist. Valor explored the perimeter with careful steps favoring his healing shoulder, but not letting it slow him down. He checked corners, tested approaches, cleared the property with professional thoroughness. Then he climbed the porch steps and sat, looked at Addie, approval granted. Inside, she unpacked boxes that held everything worth keeping. Not much, photos of Nate that she could finally look at without breaking. Documents she'd need for the ongoing investigation. Clean clothes, coffee, the basics of a life being rebuilt from scratch. And Nate's notebook now preserved in archival plastic protected from time and weather and the weight of having mattered. She opened it one last time, read through his notes, his observations, his careful documentation of truth that had cost him everything. On the last page below his final message to her, she added her own words in neat handwriting that looked nothing like his but served the same purpose. I finished it. It wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. But it's done. The truth is out. The people are safe or will be once they're relocated. And I'm still here. I'm going to stay. Going to build something. Don't know what yet, but something that honors what you started. Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for believing I could do it even when I didn't believe it myself. I love you. Miss you. But I'm not lost anymore. Eh? She closed the notebook, set it on a shelf where morning light would touch it. A reminder, a memorial, a promise kept. Outside, the sound of a vehicle approaching. Forest Service truck. Wade at the wheel. He parked, got out carrying a box that looked suspiciously like it held food. Thought you might need supplies, he said when she opened the door. Also thought you might need company. If you're staying. I'm staying. Good. He set the box on the porch table. Town's going to need people who give a damn, even if it's not the same town anymore. Maybe especially because it's not. The box held coffee. Real coffee, the expensive kind. Bread from somewhere that knew how to bake it properly. And pie. Apple pie from Estelle's diner, somehow still operating out of a food truck despite evacuation orders. Valor approached the box immediately. Nose working with professional interest. He sniffed the pie carefully. 3 deliberate inhalations gathering data processing, composition, reaching conclusion. Then he looked up at Wade. Tail moved once. Clear approval. Wade laughed surprised. Guess Estelle's pie passes military standards. High praise from him, Addie said. He rejected her hot dog on day 1. That was fast food grade. This is the real stuff. Wade pulled out a fork. She made it herself when she heard you were staying. Said anyone who fights that hard for truth deserves pie for life. Valor's tail moved again, slightly faster, as close to enthusiasm as the dog ever showed for anything that wasn't tactical work. She also said your judgmental dog is welcome anytime, Wade continued. Says he's got better sense than most people she serves. They sat on the porch, ate pie that tasted like forgiveness, even though neither of them needed it. Drank coffee while clouds gathered over distant mountains, promising weather that would pass like everything else. EPA's starting the buyout process, Wade said eventually. Fair market value plus 20% for hardship. Most people will take it. Some are fighting. Can't blame them either way. Have you heard how people are talking about, Addie paused. About me. Wade was quiet for a moment. honest enough not to sugarcoat it. Mixed. Some are grateful. Understand you saved their lives even if it cost them their homes. Others, he shrugged. Others think you destroyed their town for no reason. Think contamination was overblown. Think they were fine and you ruined everything. Were they fine? No, cancer rates were already elevated. Birth defects 3 times county average. People were dying and didn't know why. You gave them answers. Whether they wanted them or not, it was the truth. Didn't make it easier to hear. Lillian's leaving, Wade continued, heading to Montana. Says she's done with Oregon, done with fighting battles nobody wants won. Can't blame her. Can't. He looked at her directly. But you're staying. I am. Why? Addie thought about it. About Valor refusing to leave when she tried to run. About Caleb Reese trapped on contaminated ground. About Nate's notebook and his final request. About the choice between comfort and truth. Because someone has to remember what happened here. Someone has to make sure it matters. And because she looked at Valor, who watched the tree line with patient vigilance. Because I was told to finish the mission. And the mission isn't just exposing truth. It's making sure the truth means something after. Wade nodded slowly, stood. Then you'll need help, and you'll have it, for whatever comes next. He left as the storm rolled in. Rain fell, thunder moved closer. And in a small cabin on land that was finally actually safe, a woman who'd spent 3 years running finally stopped. Finally stayed. Finally began the work of building a life that wasn't defined by what she'd lost, but by what she'd chosen to protect. The rain continued through the night. By morning, the world looked washed clean. New. Ready for whatever came next. Addie stood on the porch with coffee and watched the sun rise over mountains that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. Valor sat beside her shoulder, healing spirit undimmed, ready to work. Her phone buzzed. Email from the EPA, subject line. Consultation opportunity. Contaminated site investigation. They wanted to hire her, use her experience, put her skills toward finding other buried secrets, other covered-up disasters, other towns slowly dying on poison ground. She stared at the email for a long time. This was it, the fork in the road. She could say no, could stay quiet, could build her small life in her small cabin and let the world handle its own problems. Or she could say yes, could pick up the mission Nate had started and carry it forward, could become the person who finished what others were too afraid to start. Valor looked up at her, her amber eyes patient, waiting for her decision but not judging whatever she chose. Except that was a lie. He'd judge, would sit by the truck and refuse to move if she tried to hide again, would make his opinion clear in the silent, stubborn way that had already saved her life twice. She smiled, scratched behind his ear, felt him lean into the contact. All right, she said quietly. One more mission. His tail moved, approval granted. She typed her response. Short, professional. I'm interested. When do we start? The reply came within minutes. Next week. Montana, abandoned uranium mine. Local residents reporting health issues. Company denies responsibility. Sound familiar? It did. It sounded exactly like Black Pine Falls. Like Silverbrook. Like every covered-up disaster where profit mattered more than people and truth was the first casualty. I'll be there, she wrote back. She forwarded the email to Wade, to Lillian, to the network they'd built through necessity and maintained through choice. This was what came next. Not retirement, not peace, but purpose. Sometimes miracles don't come like lightning striking from clear sky. Sometimes they come as a dog who refuses to leave when you try to run. As loyalty that won't quit even when quitting makes sense. As truth that finally gets heard after decades of silence. In this story, a woman tried to hide from grief and responsibility and the weight of choices that cost lives. Her canine refused to let her. Together they finished what a good man started. Saved people who'd never know they needed saving. Proved that courage isn't about being fearless, but about being afraid and staying anyway. About doing the right thing even when it costs everything. About finishing the mission even when the mission destroys you. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear that truth matters. That loyalty saves lives, that standing up when everyone else sits down is how the world changes one hard choice at a time. Comment what moment stayed with you. What choice you'd make in Addie's place. What you'd do if you found a rail car full of secrets in your forest. Subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the quiet heroism of staying when running is easier. May God bless and keep you. May He place faithful companions on your path when you need them most. May he give you the strength to stand for truth, even when truth is costly. And may you always have someone beside you who refuses to let you quit when the work matters most. The rain stopped. Sun broke through clouds. And in a cabin on safe ground, a woman and her dog prepared for the next mission, knowing they'd done what needed doing. And that was enough. That was everything.